the inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Most people think of the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center as a history museum focused on the story from the past, the destruction of 19th century American slavery. But the founders of the center always intended to use that story as a metaphor. From the earliest planning proposal in 1994, the mission was to create a place dedicated to helping people understand contemporary efforts to achieve freedom and to provide a safe environment for frank discussion, a place where people could develop skills to promote the extension of freedom around the world. Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. On this weekend, as we stop to contemplate the meaning of the life of Dr. Martin Luther King, it is a good time to look at the work of the Freedom Center, especially the programs focused on contemporary issues in our community, in America, and literally around the world. Certainly in the aftermath of the events of Ferguson, New York City, and Cincinnati during 2014, the relevance of the Freedom Center only grows. I am joined this morning for the entire show by Dr. Clarence G. Newsome, the president of the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. Before joining the Freedom Center, he served as the president of Shaw University in North Carolina and as the dean of the School of Divinity at Howard University. He holds 3 degrees from Duke University and is a member of the Board of Trustees at Duke. And Brooke Hathaway, the manager of the anti-trafficking programs of the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. Her work focuses on shining a light on modern slavery and the people who are working as modern freedom conductors to end it. As Ms. Hathaway recently returned from a 2-week trip to Eastern Europe to document the efforts to end those forms, several forms of modern slavery. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Well, thank you, Dan, for having us.
Yeah, well, this is a great weekend to have you. And I have to clarify, as I do many times, we're recording this show on Friday morning. There's some things happening over the weekend before the show that we may reference, but you know, we can't pretend this is Sunday morning. This is Friday morning. Dr. Newsome, how would you describe the focus of the Freedom Center in 2015?
Well, we champion freedom so that all people everywhere will and shall live free. And we qualify that word free with this phrase, inclusive freedom. These days, the notion of freedom is a little ambiguous for a lot of folks based on the way in which people have tried to apply it. So we feel that one of our objectives should be to put forth a very clear understanding of what freedom should be about. So we call it inclusive freedom, meaning all people everywhere enjoying equal rights and privileges in the sense of equal number, equal kind, equal quality. Now, or maybe on another occasion I can work that out a little bit, but I'll give you one quick example. I threw out the first pitch, August 22nd, for the Reds-Braves game. I grew up in a town that had Little League Baseball, but the Little League Baseball diamond available to me as an African-American kid had no mound. Across town they had a bunch of fields and all of them had mounds. So just in terms of numbers, one field, no mound, bunches of fields, all mounds. The first time I'd ever been on a mound in my life and I'd played Little League Baseball was August 22nd. Really? So you apply that to other notions of kind and quality. There are other examples I could give you. But one of our objectives is to really make clear throughout this nation and throughout this world what freedom should look like in terms of its application.
And you're using this term inclusiveness. You are, as I referenced, a member of the board at Duke University. There is a controversy at this very moment about inclusiveness on the campus of Duke in terms of the call to prayer for Muslim students. What's your opinion about that and how that has played out? And my understanding is, as of this morning, Duke has withdrawn having that call broadcast from the tower.
Well, one thing about a college campus, you're always challenged with the next opportunity to be inclusive. And Duke, over the years, has had to struggle with this like every other college or university. Right now, we're in the process of working all of this through to come up with a very, very good outcome. I'm very optimistic that the outcome will be a good one because I've been a part of the life of Duke University for almost 40 years. I am myself a witness to the kind of goodness that has come through the kind of dialogue and openness that has taken place on that campus, and particularly in the area of religious freedom. I was a religious studies major.
A divinity degree?
And then with a divinity degree, and then with a PhD degree. And this whole notion of religious freedom and openness is something that I learned on that campus in some pioneering ways, but also served as the chairman of the Duke University Chapel for a number of years. I've preached there. I've been up in the Caroline Tower and watched the performer perform. The good thing about this is that we are in another position on that campus to establish a precedent. And it's still in process. I have every reason to believe that we're going to have the right kind of outcome based on our track record. It hadn't been easy. A lot of people have had to go through a lot of pain and anguish over the years to come up with the right kind of response, but it's underway.
Do you personally, as someone responsible for the chapel in the past, are you personally offended in any way by the proposal for the call to prayer?
It's too soon for me right now to weigh in on whether that is the right setting or whether there should be some alternative setting. To some extent, people kind of think this is a new thing. Well, what about the Catholics? What about the Jewish students? The chapel on Duke's campus has been at the center of a whole bunch of conversations about non-Protestant groups on campus, and to some extent it's within the context of that broader discussion that the one presently at hand comes before us.
Well, that's very interesting. In a city that we live in, the three of us now live in, which is a very Catholic place, we sometimes forget that Catholics were the problem. At the same time in the 19th century as slavery,
and a lot of people might not be, as a religious historian, a lot of people might not be aware that Lane Theological Seminary was created partly to kind of hold in check the spread of Catholicism in this region of the country.
Absolutely, and we could get into that as a religious historian myself. So we'll talk about that. One of the things about an institution like the Freedom Center is that over time it only is successful as it develops relationships, and it's not just open a building and instant success. And over since the opening in 2004, I'm interested in what's the relationships, and Brooke, I'd like to get you drawn in. We're going to focus on your specific programs later, but there's this new relationship, or I don't even know how old the relationship is, with the United States State Department, correct?
Correct.
That's an interesting relationship. What is that?
We've had a relationship with the State Department for 3 or 4 years now. This is our second grant project that we've been working on with them. The first was a documentary that we produced in conjunction with the State Department and Google. This time we're working with them on their annual Trafficking in Persons report. They nominate a series of heroes, and so we're working to better spotlight those heroes years after they receive this award. So that's the current project. But the relationship with State Department has been fantastic. For instance, they've taken us overseas to visit with these tip heroes. We meet with them in Washington regularly. They've been great counselors to the work that we're doing.
And they've also, some of them anyway, have been able to come here, right?
Absolutely. Every year in June, they bring their new class of Trafficking in Person, or TIP heroes, out to Cincinnati. So we're the second city and one of 3. So they always visit 3 cities, Washington, D.C., Cincinnati, and then one other city each year. So it's great. And they come to Cincinnati because of the Freedom Center. So that's a great relationship.
Which really was the vision originally, that this happened to be a national museum that just happened to be in Cincinnati. It was not a Cincinnati institution. It was really a national institution. What about other relationships that the Freedom Center has developed?
Well, let me say that with respect to this being a national institution in the city of Cincinnati, it's really a little bit more than than just by happens to be. This is the right place for all kinds of historical reasons, as you so well know. I want to put that forth. And for purposes of being in a part of the country where we could begin to develop relationships on a national and international level that would help us to get the word about freedom out. Freedom itself only has meaning as people are able to relate to one another positively. You could put somebody on an island out in the Pacific and leave them there alone, and freedom really has no practical meaning. So we've been trying to develop relationships here locally, first of all, so that our roots go deep where we are in order to demonstrate what it is we're trying to carry throughout the nation and abroad. Recently, we had Lech Walesa here. We had President Mandela's great-grandson here. Those are instances of us building relationships on an international level that will help us to have a presence in Poland and in South Africa. And right now we're talking about a trip for me to go to South Africa. We are working to develop a relationship with the Nelson Mandela Museum in South Africa so that we can continue to get our word out. I was in Indonesia a little over a year ago talking about freedom there. I'm now moving about the country. We are in the process of establishing a branch of the Freedom Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have requests for me to go to Raleigh and Durham. We have conversations very actively underway for me to get back to Atlanta to start planting the seeds for a branch of the Freedom Center in Atlanta. And I'm heading out to Milwaukee and so forth and so on, building these very, very personal relationships, learning from others what it is we ought to be saying and how we fine-tune our message, but making an impact with respect to teaching people what freedom means, advocating for freedom, and making this a nation that really lives up to its creed.
You know, sometimes I think you know, it's the profit in your own land problem.
Yes.
That sometimes people locally don't know. I mean, hearing those sorts of relationships. What's the situation in terms of visitation and financial health at the Freedom Center? Because I hear lots of comments in the community, and I frequently find myself saying, I don't think that's true. So what is the situation?
That's a good question, because you've got a lot of misinformation out there. I mean, we have a whole lot of people coming through that place, and we're just beginning, really, to realize our potential in that regard, especially children through our School on Freedom program. When I see all those buses line up there and I'm having to walk over kids or around kids, I had an experience about a month ago where there were a group of kids in there doing some studying, and they were in our From Slavery to Freedom exhibit, and one of them was laying on the floor with her feet propped up with a notebook in hand, and others were crowded around.
Typical study style.
Oh, it was just wonderful. And I had a guest with me, and I said, oh, I love this. And I just said, well, let me just kind of ease my way through. That is the sense of what's going on there. Now, we have activities over there almost 7 days a week right now. And we're just beginning to get the word out around the country about us being the destination. We've got some wonderful examples, but one of the things that's happening in a very, very good way for us is our recognition throughout the country and the world as being the leading underground railroad organization in the world. This past September, the Underground Railroad Free Press, with a kind of juried panel, determined that we are the #1 underground railroad organization in the world. You've got places like this in Brazil, in Iraq, Iran. There are a bunch of these organizations. We're numero uno.
One last thing before we take a break here. We're taping on Friday. Tomorrow there's going to be a special conference, so it will be over by the time this airs. But it's about sort of where Cincinnati has come since 2001 and the civil unrest in 2001. But I want to focus on one aspect of that, and that's going to be chaired by Michael Battle, who's the new executive VP and provost, who is the former ambassador to the African Union. This is a very substantial person who is now here.
Just listen to what you're saying. This is why I'm so excited about the Underground Railroad Freedom Center, the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, we have been able to attract one of the top talents in the nation. He's just coming out of a post as the United States Ambassador to the African Union based in Addis Ababa. He was the government's representative to 54 heads of state. He was involved in all kinds of high-level negotiations. Oh, his resume is extensive. We've been able to attract him here. I've known him for a long time, and you're talking about relationships, that's how we got him.
We're going to take a short break, and we're going to come back, and maybe we should let Brooke talk.
A little bit.
Stay tuned. Right after the break, Dr. Newsome and Brooke Hathaway will return for a fuller discussion of her work.
There you go.
Welcome back. I am joined this morning on Martin Luther King weekend by the president of the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, Dr. C.G. Newsome, and Brooke Hathaway, the manager of the anti-trafficking programs at the Freedom Center. Brooke, a lot of your work is sort of grounded in an exhibit that was opened a couple of years ago. Just if people haven't seen that, and we're going to show a little bit of footage, give them a sense of what we're talking about when we're talking about human trafficking and modern slavery.
We have an exhibit at the Underground Railroad Museum that is called Invisible Slavery Today. And it's called invisible because human trafficking, or what we often call modern day slavery, is very invisible today. It's illegal in every country worldwide, and so therefore it's still happening, but it's much harder to see. We have to look under the surface.
And what are we talking about? What kinds of things?
So we talk about 5 different types of modern day slavery. So human trafficking is when somebody is taken and sold into a slave situation, right? They're trafficked into it. Slavery would be bonded labor, so meaning you have a debt over your head, and we have families, that's actually the largest form of slavery around the world.
Okay.
You have entire families in that type of enslavement. Forced labor, being forced to physically work. Child labor, so when children are forced to work. Domestic servitude, this is an interesting category because it's so hard to see because it's inside of homes, so it's very internal and very informal. And then sex trafficking, right? That's what most people are very familiar with, but that's one of 5. In all of these instances, people aren't receiving money for their work, or if they are receiving low wages, they're being forced to repay that, plus additional monies back to people, and they can't walk away from it. So it's slavery.
You're trapped.
You're trapped. You can't walk away.
What's been the reaction to the Freedom Center taking on something as cutting edge, contemporary, that exhibit? What's been the reaction?
Extremely positive, because throughout the nation, people are recognizing more and more that there is this problem. We're playing a key role in just disseminating the information about it and bringing people up to a certain level of awareness. But we are being recognized as the come-to, go-to place in order to get the resources or the direction needed to get involved to help bring about an end to this dastardly practice. And an example would be Ted Turner showing up about a year ago on a Saturday, having just come out of a hospital, having had surgery, to see our center and to see the invisible slavery exhibit, especially with a nurse by his side.
Because he had heard about it? And
because
he
had heard about it, and you know he has some Cincinnati roots and ties, and the local connection for him mentioned it to him, and he created time in his schedule to get to the museum center, to the Freedom Center, and I was able to stop what I was doing, put on some clothes, and go over there and spend a day with him. It was a wonderful time, and this is very indicative of the kind of effect we're having in this regard.
Brooke, you have just come back in December, correct?
Yes.
From this tour in Eastern Europe. Where did you actually go? And we have some photographs, and let's pull up the first of the images, but go ahead and tell us, what were you doing?
Yes, 3 of us from the Freedom Center went with thanks to the U.S. State Department to 2 different countries in Eastern Europe. This photo was taken in Lithuania. That woman there in the middle with the blue shirt is a woman that runs an organization in Lithuania who serves different human trafficking survivors. And so she does all different types of case management. She works for an organization, Caritas International, and they run the human trafficking program for a country of 3 million people. And so she won this award in the early 2000s, and it was great to talk with her. An interesting story about her, she was very very interested in the U.S. She has never been. She was the only hero that hadn't been to the U.S. before. And she was very interested in, well, what is the U.S. like with human trafficking? And, oh my goodness, you have this problem too? And what are your laws like? And after we tried to describe the federal and state laws, which, of course, to her, in a country of 3 million, she couldn't comprehend.
Right.
She
Lots
was,
of Americans can't comprehend.
That's true. She couldn't believe that we had the same issues that these other countries have, that this truly is a global and human problem, and not something that the U.S. doesn't deal with also. We absolutely do.
I would like to go down to the very last of the photos that you gave us. I think it's labeled number 6 and it's, when we pull it up, my first, and you know, I said, well, what are we looking at here? And what are we looking at? It just looks like an empty room to me.
It is.
With a pumpkin in it.
You're looking at an empty room. You're looking at a single room, and that is a one-room apartment that a survivor of sex trafficking who had been trafficked from Lithuania into the United Kingdom, she eventually got away after years and years of sexual enslavement in the UK. She was brought back to Lithuania and obviously receiving many different social services, and ended up testifying against her traffickers in the UK, which is a huge accomplishment. Imagine how that must be for somebody that has been under abuse by these people for years and years. So she receives a large settlement and buys an apartment in Lithuania from the Lithuanian government. That one-room apartment, she now has 4 children staying in there. They all sleep on 2 couches. You can see the filth. The walls are covered in black mold. Her children now have, rashes all over because of this mold. And this is something that the government sold to her. She's a trafficking survivor. And that's the type of things that they face. After you leave a situation of human trafficking, you need empowerment, right? You need opportunities for job and skill training to truly reach a freedom that's inclusive, right? Just because she's left that situation, she has such a tough road and without support. So the woman that you saw in the first photo is still providing that support and helping her family, bringing food. But you can imagine the type of services and what the commitment to this is long, right? It's not something that just starts and ends quickly.
So Lithuania, where else were you?
We went to Bucharest, Romania, where we met with a group that works and has the only shelter for women in Bucharest that are taken out of the sex trade. So we met survivors there. We met her staff. It was incredible.
And when you say you met them, you were videotaping, right? We have some images of your crew working with camera and whatever. What's going to happen to the material that you created?
So the State Department sent us because we are launching a project called the TIP Global Heroes Network. So the TIP heroes, the trafficking in persons heroes that are nominated every year, there's now 110 of them. And we are doing a website that brings together their stories, does a profile of who they are, what have they been up to since the award, and collects data and documents on what they've been doing since. It's going to be an incredible resource for teachers and classrooms to learn about this, but also to start building up a best practice library of what they've done. So we went there to visit with them, and that's what we were filming. So you will be able to see these stories, the film that we shot, many other photographs throughout the next 12 months, and that will be available a week from today at tipglobalheroesnetwork.org.
Okay, go ahead.
We have a powerful website, so I
was going to say, your website has a lot of
encourage people to really make that a regular on their day-to-day interaction with their computer. A powerful website. And the project that Brooke is working with is a powerful website. And there's that website, and there's another website,
endslaverynow.org. And I think what's unique about the Freedom Center is while we look into these stories, like we went to Lithuania, we went to Romania, and we also went to Thessaloniki, Greece. While we look at these stories, there's many frontline organizations that are examining or on the front lines trying to assist the slaves and remove them from these situations. We want to share the stories of freedom's heroes. So we're focusing on the abolitionists in these situations, which many times are the survivors themselves, right? But look at the hopeful message that they're providing, because what's unique, while slavery has persisted through many, many centuries, it didn't end in 1865. We see that with my work in human trafficking today, and that's the message we try to say, is that human trafficking isn't distinct. This is a continuum. Also, abolition work happens, and so that continues, and that's the hopeful
The language you're using is all out of the metaphor of American slavery and the destruction of slavery, but it is universal, and we're almost out of time. But
well, the work is still so very current in that regard, and it's putting us in position to partner with some very, very critically important movers and shakers in our country, like Delta Airlines. We had a wonderful visit down there a few weeks ago talking with someone who is working with Delta employees to make a difference in this space.
Okay, I have to make sure people know something about just Monday. Tomorrow was happening. The Freedom Center is the focal point for the activities all day on Martin Luther King Day. Breakfast in the morning at 8. That, I think, is sold out. But the annual march forms at the Freedom Center at 10:30 and then moves into the city. And the Freedom Center is open all day for free. And the special exhibits on human trafficking and the new exhibit on voting and the
Power of the Vote, that exhibit is up. The Holocaust 70 years later, and go into our gift shop. And
all museums go into the gift shop. Thank you very much. Amazing work in 10 years of forming these relationships and having an impact. Congratulations. Thank you for making Newsmakers part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the men and the women shaping our community for a better future. Have a great week.
Thank you.